Oh my God, he shot him!
2 bullets. No hesitation.
That's my husband.
No. That's the man you've been married to. There's a difference.
My phone buzzed against the damp kitchen counter, vibrating through a tiny puddle of spilled tap water. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer. But the heavy, raspy voice on the other end didn't say hello. You need to see the footage. Come alone. Don't tell your husband. The line went dead with a soft, digitized click. I stood there in the center of my kitchen, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the hollow static of the disconnected call. The refrigerator compressor hummed into life, a low, rattling vibration that usually went unnoticed. But right now it sounded deafening. A drop of water rolled off the edge of the granite counter and hit the linoleum floor. Don't tell your husband. I lowered the phone. My fingers felt thick, clumsy, as if they belonged to someone else. I pressed my thumb against the screen to make sure the call was actually real, staring at the 10-digit number glaring back at me in stark white font. There was no caller ID, just the numbers. And that voice. It wasn't a prank call. You know a prank call. By the suppressed breathing, the faint snickering in the background, the forced pitch. This voice had been entirely flat. It carried the bored, exhausted weight of a man who gave orders every day of his life and never, not once, expected them to be ignored. Sebastian Carter. He hadn't introduced himself, but he didn't need to. I had heard that voice exactly once before, 3 years ago, at a charity dinner Dean's firm had sponsored. Carter had been a ghost at the edge of the ballroom, cornering Dean near the coat check. I had walked up behind them, interrupting something tense. Carter had looked at me, his eyes dead and dark, like wet stones, nodded once, and said, "Enjoy the evening, Mrs. Hayes." Now, he was calling my personal cell. The smell of minced garlic and olive oil browning in the skillet suddenly hit the back of my throat, turning my stomach. I lurched forward, grabbing the handle of the pan and yanking it off the burner. The metal scraped harshly against the iron grate. I braced both hands on the edge of the stove, dropping my head between my shoulders, trying to force oxygen into my lungs. Footage. What footage? Dean was a forensic accountant. He audited supply chains and municipal tax structures. He wore beige chinos and half-zip sweaters. He organized his sock drawer by fabric weight. He was 36, losing his hair at the temples, and fell asleep watching historical documentaries on the couch by 9:30 every night. There was no footage. There was nothing to see. The lock on the front door clicked. The heavy deadbolt slid back with its familiar metallic clunk, followed by the squeak of the bottom hinge. "Clara?" Dean's voice echoed down the narrow hallway. It was his usual Tuesday voice, tired, a little nasal, perfectly normal. I squeezed my eyes shut, swallowed the sour taste of bile sitting at the root of my tongue, and shoved my phone deep into the front pocket of my jeans. "In the kitchen," I called back. My voice sounded a pitch too high, a little too brittle. I quickly turned the burner back on, sliding the skillet over the flame. The garlic began to hiss violently. Dean walked in, dropping his leather briefcase by the island. He was already loosening his tie, a navy blue silk knit I'd bought him for our anniversary. He smelled like recycled office air, stale coffee, and the faint, chemical bite of the city subway. He walked up behind me, wrapping his arms loosely around my waist, pressing a dry kiss to the side of my neck. "Smells good," he murmured, his stubble scratching my skin. Traffic was a nightmare. The bridge was backed up past the toll booths. I didn't turn around. I couldn't look at his face. Not yet. I stared down at the wooden spoon in my hand, watching the oil bubble around the edges of the crushed garlic. I tried to feel the comfort of his weight against my back, the familiar routine of 7 years of marriage. Instead, my skin crawled. Every nerve ending screamed at me to pull away. "Clara?" He pulled back slightly, his hands resting on my hips. "You okay? You're tense." "Burned my finger," I lied, the words slipping out with a disturbing ease. I picked up a kitchen towel and wiped my completely uninjured thumb, just annoyed. I wasn't paying attention. He stepped back, opening the fridge to grab a bottle of sparkling water, put some ice on it. "You want me to finish the pasta?" "No, I've got it." I finally turned to look at him. He was twisting the cap off the bottle. He looked so devastatingly ordinary. There was a small ink stain on the cuff of his dress shirt. His eyes were crinkled at the corners, heavy with fatigue. This was the man who cried when our golden retriever had to be put down last year. This was the man who spent 3 hours building a flat-pack dresser and swore in quiet frustration the entire time. "Don't tell your husband." "Actually," I said, my voice steadying, flattening out into a frightening calm. "I need to run out for a bit. Before dinner." Dean paused, the bottle halfway to his mouth. He frowned, a genuine crease of confusion appearing between his pale brows. "Now? It's past 6. What's going on?" "Nora called," I said. The lie formed itself instantly, utilizing my sister's chaotic life as a convenient shield. She's stranded at the clinic. Her car battery died, and her phone is at 1%. She used the receptionist's desk line to call me. Dean sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Again?" I told her she needs a new alternator. "Do you want me to go? I can grab the jumper cables." "No," I said, a little too fast. I forced a tight, exasperated smile. "No, stay. You're exhausted. I'll just drive over, wait for the tow truck with her, and come back. Leave the sauce on a simmer." He looked at me for a long moment. The kitchen felt suffocatingly small. The ticking of the wall clock above the sink seemed to slow down. I held my breath, waiting for the facade to crack, waiting for him to see right through me. But he just took a sip of his water and nodded. "All right. Call me if you guys need me to pick you up. Drive safe. It's supposed to rain." "I will." I walked past him, grabbing my coat from the back of the dining chair and plucking my keys from the ceramic bowl by the door. I didn't look back as I walked out. The moment the front door clicked shut behind me, the cold evening air hit my face, smelling of damp concrete and approaching rain. I got into my car. The interior was freezing. I gripped the hard plastic steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. I sat there in the driveway for a full minute, staring at the warm yellow light spilling from my kitchen window. I could see Dean's silhouette moving past the blinds. I put the car in drive and pulled away from my house, feeling like I was stepping off a cliff in the dark. The address Carter had texted me 5 minutes after the phone call wasn't a luxury penthouse downtown or a hidden speakeasy behind a velvet rope. It was a salvage yard on the industrial edge of the South Side, bordered by a polluted canal and a stretch of abandoned rail lines. The drive took 40 minutes. The promised rain had started falling in thick, greasy sheets, smearing the windshield and turning the glare of oncoming headlights into blinding, starburst streaks. The heater in my 10-year-old sedan was broken, spitting out lukewarm, dusty air that did nothing to clear the fogging glass. I kept wiping the inside of the windshield with the sleeve of my coat, shivering, my heart beating in a slow, heavy rhythm that felt entirely disconnected from my body. I turned off the main road onto a heavily rutted dirt path. The tires plunged into water-filled potholes, throwing mud against the undercarriage with a violent crunching sound. At the end of the road stood a 12-foot chain-link fence, topped with rusted razor wire. A heavy metal gate blocked the entrance, bathed in the sickly, buzzing orange glow of a single sodium vapor street lamp. A man was leaning against the guard shack. He wasn't wearing a tailored suit. He wore a stained Carhartt jacket, a beanie pulled low over his ears, and he was smoking a cigarette under the scant shelter of the shack's overhang. As my headlights hit him, he didn't flinch. He just took a slow drag, dropped the cigarette into a puddle, and walked up to my driver's side window. I rolled it down. The smell of wet earth, raw diesel fuel, and rotting garbage from the canal washed into the car. "Clara Hayes?" he asked. His voice was gravelly, his breath fogging in the cold air. "Yes." He didn't ask for ID. He didn't pat me down. He just tapped the roof of my car twice with a thick, calloused hand and stepped back. The heavy metal gate began to slide open with a screeching groan of ungreased gears. I drove through slowly, the tires slipping slightly in the mud. The yard was massive, a graveyard of crushed metal. Pyramids of rusted car chassis loomed in the dark like the rib cages of dead leviathans. Deep in the back, past the towering piles of scrap, was a squat, corrugated steel building. A single light burned above a heavy steel door. I parked, killed the engine, and sat in the silence for a moment. My hands were shaking. Not a violent tremor, but a fine, high-frequency vibration that I couldn't stop. I shoved them deep into my coat pockets, stepped out into the rain, and walked toward the door. Before I could even reach for the handle, it opened inward. The man who opened it wasn't the guard. It was Sebastian Carter. He looked different than he had at the charity gala. Stripped of the tuxedo, he looked entirely native to this miserable, rusted place. He wore a dark, ribbed Henley, the sleeves pushed up to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and layered with faint, silvery scars. He looked exhausted. Deep purple shadows bruised the skin under his eyes, and his dark hair was slightly damp, as if he'd been running his hands through it all day. He didn't look at me like a predator looks at prey. He looked at me the way a mechanic looks at a broken engine, assessing, burdened, and utterly devoid of pity. "You came," he said. The rasp in his voice was rougher in person. "You didn't give me much of a choice," I replied, surprising myself with the steadiness of my own voice. He stepped back, pulling the door wider. "Come in, close it behind you." I stepped into the office. The air inside was stiflingly warm and smelled heavily of stale tobacco smoke, wet dog, and the acrid tang of coffee burned to the bottom of a glass pot. It was a miserable room. A flickering fluorescent tube overhead cast a greenish pallor over a battered metal desk, 2 folding chairs, and a filing cabinet that looked like it had been kicked repeatedly. Sebastian walked behind the desk and dropped into a cheap vinyl office chair. It shrieked in protest under his weight. He didn't offer me a seat, a drink, or an apology. He just reached out with one hand, noticing a thick, raised burn scar wrapping around his left wrist, and pulled a sleek silver laptop out from under a stack of manifests. It was the only expensive thing in the room. "How much do you know about your husband's firm, Clara?" he asked, not looking up as he opened the laptop. The screen cast a pale blue light across his face. "He's a forensic accountant. He audits for mid-level logistics companies." I recited the lines I had told my mother, my friends, my sister, for 7 years. "He finds missing money." Sebastian let out a short, hollow sound. It wasn't a laugh. "Yeah, he finds it. And then he moves it." He finally looked up at me. "I run a very specific kind of logistics network. It requires liquidity, cash. Moving large amounts of cash quietly is an art form. Your husband is an artist." I swallowed hard. The room felt like it was shrinking. "If my husband is doing illegal accounting for you, I don't know anything about it. I don't look at his work." "I don't care about the accounting," Sebastian said softly, leaning back in the squeaking chair. "I care about the $3.2 million that went missing from my operational accounts last month. And I care about the man who was supposed to be guarding it." He spun the laptop around on the desk so it faced me. "Watch," he commanded. I walked closer to the desk, the soles of my boots sticking slightly to the grimy linoleum. I looked down at the screen. The video was silent, black and white, and grainy, the unmistakable high-angle perspective of a security camera. The timestamp in the bottom right corner blinked in stark white digits. It was dated 3 nights ago, 2:14 a.m. The scene was a subterranean parking garage, concrete pillars, harsh lighting, shadows pooling in the corners. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, a car pulled into the frame. A dark, nondescript sedan. The driver's side door opened, and a man stepped out. My breath caught in the back of my throat, effectively choking me. It was Dean. He was wearing the charcoal trench coat I had picked up from the dry cleaners last week. He looked perfectly calm. He didn't look over his shoulder. He didn't hurry. He walked to the trunk of the car and popped it open. A second man walked into the frame from the direction of the stairwell. He was younger, broad-shouldered, wearing a leather jacket. He approached Dean, carrying a heavy-looking canvas duffel bag. They stopped by the trunk. The camera angle was too high to catch the nuances of their expressions, but their body language was entirely conversational, casual. The younger man dropped the bag into the trunk. Then, Dean reached into the pocket of his trench coat. He didn't pull out his phone. He didn't pull out his car keys. He pulled out a handgun with a long, thick suppressor threaded to the barrel. There was no hesitation, no dramatic pause. Dean raised the gun and shot the younger man twice in the chest. The violence was shockingly fast and completely sterile. The younger man crumpled backward, hitting the concrete floor hard, his legs folding under him awkwardly. He lay perfectly still. On the screen, Dean didn't panic. He didn't run. He calmly leaned over the body, checked the man's pockets, and pulled out a set of keys. Then, Dean stepped back. He looked down at his right foot, casually wiping the side of his leather dress shoe against the back of his left calf, checking for blood splatter. Satisfied, he closed the trunk, got back into the driver's seat, and drove away, leaving the body bleeding out onto the concrete. The screen went black, returning to the video player interface. The silence in the cramped office was absolute, broken only by the buzzing of the fluorescent light overhead. My stomach gave a violent, sickening lurch. Saliva flooded the floor of my mouth, thick and metallic. I pressed the back of my hand hard against my lips, closing my eyes, waiting for the urge to vomit to pass. My knees felt entirely hollow, like glass tubes, ready to shatter. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. My brain simply couldn't process the visual data. The man checking his shoe for blood was the same man who, an hour ago, had gently kissed my neck and complained about bridge traffic. The disconnect was so vast, so insurmountable, that my mind just short-circuited into a freezing, numb void. That boy, Sebastian's voice broke the silence, low and dangerous, was my nephew, Leo. He was a runner. He was supposed to hand off the cash to your husband for laundering. Your husband decided to skip the laundering process, take the cash, and remove the witness. I opened my eyes and looked at Sebastian. He was watching me intently. He was looking for a crack, a confession, a sign that I was in on it. "Why are you showing me this?" My voice sounded dead. It didn't sound like me. It sounded like an echo from the bottom of a well. "If he stole from you, if he killed your family, why am I here? Why didn't you just kill him?" "Because," Sebastian said, leaning forward, resting his scarred arms on the desk, "Dean didn't just steal the money, he buried it. And he's a genius at burying things. My men have torn apart his servers, his shadow accounts, his offshore shells. We can't find it." He reached over and tapped a key on the laptop. A document appeared on the screen, a legal incorporation form. "He didn't hide it under his name," Sebastian continued. "He hid it under yours, a holding company registered in Delaware, under your maiden name, Clara Mercer. The assets are locked behind a biometric trust. It needs your signature, your voice authorization, and your physical presence at a bank in Zurich." I stared at the document. My name, my signature, expertly forged, but close enough to pass. "I didn't know," I whispered. "I know," Sebastian said. He stated it as a simple, irrefutable fact. "If you knew, you wouldn't have shown up tonight. You would have been on a flight to Geneva 3 days ago. Dean set you up as his failsafe. He knows I can't kill him until I find the money. And he knows I can't touch the money without you." I slowly backed away from the desk until my shoulders hit the cold, corrugated steel of the wall behind me. The damp cold seeped through my coat. So, I breathed out, the cynical, terrifying reality of my situation finally crystallizing. "You want me to steal it back for you." Sebastian's lips twitched into something resembling a grimace. "I want my money, Clara, and I want the man who put a bullet in my nephew's chest. You are going to help me get both. And if I refuse? If I go to the police?" Sebastian stood up slowly. He wasn't exceptionally tall, but the sheer, dense weight of his presence seemed to suck the oxygen out of the room. He walked around the desk, stopping a few feet in front of me. The smell of old leather and bitter coffee rolled off him. "The police can't protect you from him," Sebastian said softly. "You saw the video. You saw how easily he did it. He felt absolutely nothing. You go home tonight. You look at him across the dinner table, and you ask yourself if you want to be the only loose end standing between a sociopath and $3 million. He reached out, his rough fingers brushing the lapel of my coat, adjusting it slightly in a gesture that was terrifyingly domestic. "You belong to this now, Clara. The only way out is through me. I stood frozen against the wall. The awful, crushing truth was that Sebastian Carter, the Mafia boss with blood on his hands, standing in this filthy, smelling salvage office, wasn't the monster I was afraid of. The monster was waiting for me at home, keeping the pasta sauce on a simmer. The drive back to the suburbs was a blur of sweeping windshield wipers and hypnotic yellow road lines. I didn't turn on the radio. The silence inside the car was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic, mechanical thump of the wiper blades and the hiss of tires on wet asphalt. Sebastian's final words echoed in the enclosed space, bouncing off the damp upholstery, the only loose end standing between a sociopath and $3 million. I parked in the driveway. The house looked exactly as it had an hour and a half ago. The porch light was on, casting a warm, welcoming circle on the welcome mat we'd bought at Target 3 years ago. The hydrangeas I'd planted last spring were drooping heavily under the rain. It was a picture of domestic tranquility. It made me want to vomit. I sat in the idling car for 5 full minutes. I practiced my breathing. In through the nose, counting to 4. Out through the mouth, counting to 6. I uncurled my fingers from the steering wheel. They were stiff and aching. I rubbed my cheeks, trying to force color back into my pale skin, and checked the rearview mirror. I looked wrecked. My hair was frizzy from the dampness, my eyes wide and dark. I took one last, shuddering breath, killed the engine, and walked to the front door. The smell of garlic and tomatoes hit me the second I turned the key. It was rich, earthy, and perfectly normal. "Clara, that you?" Dean's voice drifted from the kitchen. "Yeah, it's me." I toed off my wet boots. My voice sounded thin, but steady enough. I hung my coat on the peg, acutely aware that an hour ago, Sebastian Carter's fingers had brushed against that exact spot on the fabric. I walked into the kitchen. Dean was standing at the stove, using a pair of stainless steel tongs to toss spaghetti into the bubbling red sauce. He was wearing his gray sweatpants and a worn-out college t-shirt. He glanced over his shoulder and smiled. It was an easy, relaxed smile. The corners of his eyes crinkled. "Hey, how's Nora?" "Fine," I said, leaning against the doorframe, because my knees didn't quite trust themselves to support my weight. It was the alternator, just like you said. The tow truck took forever. Classic Nora. Dean shook his head, turning back to the stove. He plated the pasta with an effortless flick of his wrist. "I poured you a glass of the Sangiovese. It's breathing on the table. Go sit down. You look frozen." I walked into the dining room. The table was set. 2 white plates, 2 linen napkins, 2 crystal wine glasses. I sat down in my usual chair. I picked up the wine glass. The stem felt delicate, fragile. I took a large swallow. The alcohol burned going down, leaving a dry, tannic coating on my tongue. Dean walked in, carrying the steaming plates. He set one in front of me and sat down opposite. "Smells great," I said. The lie tasted like ash. "Secret is the anchovy paste," he said, picking up his fork. "Melts right into the oil, adds depth." I watched his hands. I couldn't look at his face, so I stared at his hands, clean, manicured nails. The silver band on his left ring, finger catching the soft light of the chandelier. These were the hands that had folded laundry with me on Sunday. These were the hands that had calmly threaded a suppressor onto a barrel. These were the hands that had checked a shoe for the blood of a murdered boy. I picked up my fork. I twirled a small amount of pasta and forced it into my mouth. I chewed mechanically. It tasted like nothing. Mud, cardamom, dust. I forced myself to swallow. "You're quiet," Dean noted, taking a sip of his wine. His eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, fixed on me. There was no menace in them, just mild, husbandly concern. "Was it really bad with Nora? Is she drinking again?" "No," I said quickly. "No, she's sober. Just stressed. And the rain." He reached across the small table and placed his hand over my free one. His skin was warm. The touch was gentle. Every instinct, every primitive survival mechanism in my brain screamed at me to rip my hand away, to stand up, to run out the front door. and scream for help. My skin crawled beneath his palm. A cold sweat broke out along my hairline, but Sebastian's voice played back in my head. He knows I can't touch the money without you. I forced my hand to stay still. I forced my thumb to lightly stroke the side of his knuckle. I forced myself to look up from the plate, up his arm, and directly into the eyes of a killer. I'm just tired, I smiled. The muscles in my face felt rigid, like I was wearing a mask made of dried clay. It's been a long day. I know, Dean said softly, squeezing my hand. We need a break, Clara. Seriously. Things have been so crazy with the quarter-end audits. I was thinking, maybe we take some time off, get out of the city. My heart slammed against my ribs, a trapped bird throwing itself against a cage. Yeah? I managed to keep the pitch of my voice casual. Where to? I don't know yet, he said, turning his attention back to his dinner. He cut a piece of garlic bread with the side of his fork. Maybe Europe. You've always wanted to see the Alps, right? We could do Switzerland, just the two of us. I stared at him, the sheer, breathtaking audacity of it. He wasn't suggesting a vacation. He was planning an extraction. He was going to take me to Zurich, use my fingerprint, use my voice, empty the account, and then, what? What happens to a failsafe once the bomb goes off? Switzerland, I repeated, the word dissolving in the quiet room. That sounds amazing, Dean. Good, he smiled, chewing his food. I'll look at flights this weekend. That night, I lay awake in the dark. The mattress dipped slightly on Dean's side. His breathing was slow, even, and deep. He had fallen asleep within 10 minutes of turning off the bedside lamp. I lay flat on my back, staring at the invisible ceiling. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a suffocating stillness. I listened to the sound of his lungs filling and emptying. How does a man sleep like that? How does a man put a bullet in another human being, steal a fortune from the most dangerous men in the city, and then come home, eat pasta, and sleep like a child? Because he wasn't human. Not in any way that mattered. I carefully rolled over, pulling the duvet tighter around my shoulders, putting my back to him. The cold terror that had gripped me in Sebastian's office began to harden into something else. Something sharp, something pragmatic. Dean thought he was in control. Sebastian thought I was a terrified pawn. They were both about to learn that desperation is a brutal teacher. 3 days later, the burner phone arrived. I found it in my purse, tucked beneath my makeup bag. A cheap, black, prepaid model. I hadn't seen anyone approach me. I'd gone to the grocery store, the dry cleaners, and the pharmacy. Sebastian's people were ghosts. It vibrated exactly once at 2 p.m. while I was sitting in my car in the grocery store parking lot. I stared at it for a long time, the plastic casing warm against my palm. I pressed the green button and raised it to my ear. He bought the tickets. Sebastian's voice grated over the cheap speaker. No greeting, no preamble. I know, I said. I watched a mother wrestling a toddler into a minivan 2 spaces over. Normal life happening in the background, entirely ignorant of the ledge I was standing on. We leave tomorrow night. Red-eye to Geneva, then a train to Zurich. He's moving faster than I anticipated. He's spooked, Sebastian noted, the sound of a lighter flicking audible over the line. My guys intercepted an encrypted email he sent to a broker in Panama. He's setting up a secondary shadow account. Once you clear that biometric lock in Zurich, the money bounces through 6 different countries in less than a minute. I lose it forever. And then he loses me, I said, my voice deadpan. A heavy pause settled on the line. Yes, he will have no further use for you, Clara. I closed my eyes, resting my forehead against the cold steering wheel. What's the plan, Sebastian? When you get to the bank, you'll be escorted to a private terminal. The Swiss value privacy above all else. He won't be allowed in the booth with you. The terminal will ask for your fingerprint, a retina scan, and a vocal passphrase. I don't know the phrase. He'll give it to you right before you walk in, Sebastian said. He has to. Once the system unlocks, you will have a 2-minute window to enter a destination routing number. He will give you his. You are going to enter mine. I opened my eyes. He's going to be standing right outside the glass, Sebastian. The second the transfer goes through, He'll get a confirmation on his phone. If the money doesn't hit his account, he'll know exactly what I did. I have people in Zurich. Sebastian's voice dropped an octave, the gravelly edge sharpening into a blade. They will be waiting in the lobby. The second that money hits my ledger, they move in. We take Dean. You walk out the front doors, get into a black Mercedes waiting at the curb, and go to the airport. Ticket is already under a new name. You disappear. You're going to kill him in the middle of a Swiss bank? I'm going to apprehend him quietly, Sebastian corrected, though we both knew it was a lie. What happens after that is none of your concern. Your only job is to type 10 digits into a keypad. Can you do that, Clara? Do I have a choice? No. The line clicked dead. I dropped the burner phone back into my purse. The next 36 hours were a masterclass in psychological warfare. I packed my suitcase, neatly folding sweaters and trousers, playing the role of the excited, naive wife. Dean bought me a new travel adapter. He checked our passports. He was upbeat, almost manic in his efficiency. We took an Uber to the airport. The city lights smeared past the window. Dean held my hand in the back seat. His grip was tight, his thumb rubbing the back of my hand. I stared out the window, watching the rain start to fall again. Nervous? He asked softly. I looked at him. The dashboard lights cast deep shadows across his face, hollowing out his cheeks, making his pale eyes look completely empty. A little, I admitted, giving him a small, nervous smile that required every ounce of willpower I possessed. I've never been to Switzerland. You'll love it, he promised, kissing my temple. It's a fresh start for us, Clara. I promise. The lie was so smooth, so practiced. It practically hummed in the air between us. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window. A fresh start. We boarded the plane. First class. Dean's treat. He drank a glass of champagne before takeoff, toasted to our anniversary, and fell asleep before we even hit cruising altitude. I didn't sleep. For 8 hours, suspended 30,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, sitting next to a man who fully intended to execute me in a foreign country, I stared at the flight tracker screen. The little digital airplane inched slowly across the blue map. I thought about the 10 digits Sebastian had made me memorize. I thought about the $3 million. I thought about Dean, waking up in a few hours, completely unaware that he was walking into a trap. But most of all, I thought about Sebastian Carter. Sebastian assumed I was just a vessel, a panicked, desperate housewife doing what she was told by a terrifying Mafia boss because she had no other options. He assumed he held all the cards because he held the routing number. I reached into my carry-on bag, pulling out my laptop. I connected to the exorbitant in-flight Wi-Fi. The cabin was dark, the only light coming from my screen. Dean slept heavily beside me, breathing the recycled air. I opened a secure browser. My hands weren't shaking anymore. They were perfectly still. I had been married to a forensic accountant for 7 years. Over 1,000 dinners, 100 bottles of wine. He had talked. He had bragged. He had complained about offshore tax havens, shell corporations in the Caymans, the loopholes in biometric trusts. I hadn't been ignoring him. I had been listening. Dean thought I was his failsafe. Sebastian thought I was his pawn. I typed a sequence of commands into the terminal window, accessing the dark web portal Dean had carelessly left open on our home network 3 months ago. It took me 20 minutes to bypass his sloppy secondary firewall. I didn't need Sebastian's routing number. I had created my own. An untraceable ledger in a decentralized exchange. The little digital plane on the screen crossed into European airspace. The sun was beginning to rise, bleeding a thin, bruised, purple line across the horizon. Dean shifted in his sleep, his hand falling open on the armrest. I looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing. The fear was gone, burned away by a cold, sterile logic. I wasn't going to save the Mafia's money, and I wasn't going to wait for Sebastian's men to save me in a bank lobby. When the prompt flashed on the screen in Zurich, I wasn't going to type Dean's number, and I wasn't going to type Sebastian's number either. I closed the laptop and watched the sunrise. Clara is done playing the victim. Trapped between a sociopathic husband and a ruthless Mafia boss, she's taking the ultimate gamble and stealing the $3.2 million for herself. Will her brilliant counter-heist work in Zurich? Or is she flying straight into a bloodbath? If you love seeing a smart, underestimated protagonist turn the tables, smash that like button, drop a comment on what you think Clara will do next, and subscribe to catch the explosive finale.